For more than 4 decades, one strategy has defined America's approach to Iran: sanctions. Administration after administration has tightened the economic screws, believing that enough financial pressure would eventually force Tehran to change course. Yet, after more than 40 years, Iran remains defiant. From the aftermath of the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis to disputes over Iran's nuclear program, ballistic missile development, and regional influence, Washington has repeatedly turned to economic sanctions as its weapon of choice. Billions of dollars in Iranian assets have been frozen, oil exports have been targeted, banks have been cut off from the global financial system. Businesses around the world have been threatened with penalties for trading with Iran. The sanctions have become some of the toughest ever imposed on any country. The Iranian economy has certainly suffered. Inflation has surged. The currency has collapsed multiple times. Ordinary citizens have endured rising prices, unemployment, and shortages. But despite the economic pain, one thing has remained remarkably consistent. Iran's political system has survived. Its missile program has continued to advance. Its regional allies have remained active. Its influence across the Middle East has persisted. Every new sanctions package has promised to be tougher than the last. Every administration has argued that maximum pressure would eventually produce different results, yet the same questions keep returning. If 4 decades of sanctions have not fundamentally changed Iran's strategic decisions, are sanctions achieving their intended objective? Supporters argue that sanctions have weakened Iran's economy, reduced government revenues, and slowed its ability to finance military ambitions. Critics counter that sanctions rarely force governments to abandon policies they consider essential to their national security. Instead, they argue, countries adapt by finding new trading partners, developing alternative financial networks, increasing domestic production, and relying on informal markets. Iran appears to have done exactly that. Despite years of isolation, it has strengthened ties with countries willing to bypass Western pressure, diversified parts of its economy, and continued investing in strategic capabilities. Now Donald Trump is once again relying heavily on sanctions. For his supporters, this represents necessary pressure on a government they view as destabilizing. For critics, however, it looks like the repetition of a strategy whose limits have already been exposed over 4 decades. From that perspective, the question is no longer whether sanctions can hurt Iran. They clearly can. The real question is whether they can force Iran to fundamentally change its strategic behavior. After more than 40 years, the answer remains far from clear. History suggests that economic pressure alone has imposed enormous costs, but it has not delivered the decisive political transformation many policymakers expected. Whether that changes in the future remains uncertain. Up to this point, Trump still thinks military campaign and economic sanction will lead Iran to total surrender. That's not that bright.